What I want to talk about is that the Ayers connection is one that Obama needs to explain. But Hillary's connections with terrorists are far more extensive. In 1980s, Hillary sat on the board of the New World Foundation that gave a grant to the Palestine Liberation Organization, headed by Arafat, which back then was identified as a terrorist group. And then in 1996, she had a reception at the White House organized by the American Muslim Association. And Steve Emerson, who you've had on your show, who is really the expert on domestic terrorism, said curiously nearly all of the leaders with whom Mrs. Clinton elected to meet came from Islamic fundamentalist organizations. And he said that AMA has sanctioned terrorism, published anti-Semitic statements, and repeatedly hosted conferences that were forums for denunciation of Jews and exhortations to jihad. Then, in 2000, Hillary got a $50,000 contribution from the American Muslim Association that somehow or other got listed on her form as the American Museum Association. And by the time they discovered what it was and she had to give back the money, it was a week before Election Day and she couldn't use soft money.
By the way, Dick,
anyway.
let me just...
Now, those connections to terrorists are a whole lot more significant than Barack Obama's
Let me point out to you, the June 11th, 1999 Jewish Daily Forward reported the New World Foundation granted funds to something called Grassroots International, which in turn funneled money to two PLO-affiliated groups. And Hillary Clinton says the grant was made for $10,000 to Grassroots International for a specific project in South Africa. If money was diverted, she didn't know anything about it. And, it was at least one or two steps removed here. You're drawing a parallel line here which does not exist.
Let's add that to the list of the things Hillary didn't know about. That her brothers were being paid to get pardons out of her husband, that her husband pardoned the Puerto Rican terrorists and the FALN, as well as the whole litany of things that Hillary's been involved in. My point is that we are not talking here about families whose kids played together or an association with somebody who was a terrorist 40 years ago. We're talking about her being involved with terrorist organizations, and they're thinking highly enough of her to give her $50,000 for her campaign. That's what I'm talking about. And by the way, this information is available on my website, dickmorris.com.
No, it is, and I read your column. But what did you think of McCain's answer?
I think that Obama has a lot of explaining to do. And when we get to the general election and it's Obama against McCain, I'm going to have a lot more to say on it. But tomorrow it's Obama against Hillary. And you have one guy who you tie into terrorism by a arm's-length association and another person that got a $50,000 contribution from a terrorist organization in the hopes that she could get elected to the United States Senate. And by the way, Aaron Klein at the World Net Daily has a wonderful book called Schmoozing with Terrorists, where he interviewed the terrorists personally and found they are all supporting Hillary Clinton for president. I was appalled, Sean, during that Philadelphia debate when Hillary Clinton suggested that she would go to a nuclear war to defend the city of Dubai and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. What happened was that Stephanopoulos asked Obama, would you go to nuclear war to support Israel if Iran bombed Israel with nukes? And he said yes. And then Hillary said yes, but I would also extend our retaliatory protection to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, where Dubai is located, and Kuwait. Now, what she's literally saying is these anti-Israel, anti-Semitic governments that are among the most repressive on the planet are so deserving of our support that she would even risk a retaliation against the United States. She would trade New York for Dubai. And I wonder if that's what Dubai got for the $15 million they paid Bill.
This kind of game in which anybody who I know, regardless of how flimsy the relationship is somehow their ideas could be attributed to me. I think the American people are smarter than that. They're not going to suggest somehow that that is reflective of my views, because it obviously isn't.
Well, I think that is a fair general statement. But I also believe that Senator Obama served on a board with Mr. Ayers for a period of time, the Woods Foundation, which was a paid directorship position. And if I'm not mistaken, that relationship with Mr. Ayers on this board continued after 9/11 and after his reported comments, which were deeply hurtful to people in New York. And I would hope to every American, because they were published on 9/11, and he said that he was just sorry they hadn't done more. And what they did was set bombs, and in some instances, people died.
I'm going to have to respond to this just really quickly, but by Senator Clinton's own vetting standards, I don't think she would make it, since President Clinton pardoned or commuted the sentences of 2 members of the Weather Underground, which I think is a slightly more significant act than me serving on a board with somebody for actions that he did 40 years ago.
The FBI shot this hidden video of 2 Puerto Rican nationalists making bombs in a Chicago safe house 16 years ago. And now that grainy footage has become ammunition in a battle between the White House and Congress over the president's grant of clemency to these 2 and 9 other Puerto Rican nationalists.
And what they did was set bombs, and in some instances, people died.
Nobody dreamt that this was a daytime bombing of a restaurant in New York City in the United States of America, because it simply was not the sort of thing that happened in America.
The senseless bombing had been perpetrated by what was arguably the most active terrorist organization in U.S. history, the FALN. But in 1975, the FALN was a newly formed, previously unheard of organization that through deadly violence advocated complete independence for Puerto Rico.
6 people were killed in the FALN bombings over a period of several years, and more than 70 were injured. But the White House says the people who got clemency don't have blood on their hands.
In this case, they were convicted of very serious crimes, not of maiming or killing, but of serious weapons offenses.
The 2 people in this video, Edwin Cortez and Alejandrina Torres, were convicted of conspiracy to make destructive devices and possession of explosives, among other things.
And what they did was set bombs, and in some instances, people died.
But the president apparently believes that the people who made bombs are different from those who set them off.
Because I did not believe they should be held in incarceration, in effect, by guilt by association.
Critics in Congress from both parties don't buy it, but clemency is a presidential prerogative, and Congress may not be able to stop it.
Hillary's biggest problem running for the Senate was that she wasn't a New Yorker. And how is she going to appeal to the specific ethnic groups that make up the New York State electorate? So, in September 1999, right in the middle of her Senate campaign, she was approached by City Councilman Jose Rivera, who really is a spokesman for the Hispanic community in New York, who gave her a packet urging the pardoning of the FALN terrorists. And included in the packet was a letter to Hillary asking her to use her influence on her husband to get these pardons granted. And 2 days later, they were.
Freedom came today for most of the 14 Puerto Ricans who accepted President Clinton's controversial gift of clemency. 11 of them, who describe themselves as nationalists, some others describe them as terrorists, were released from federal prisons around the country.
It made no sense. Not one of the incarcerated FALN terrorists had requested clemency or had expressed any remorse. In fact, prior to that action, the Clinton administration had granted clemency in just 3 cases out of over 3,000 applications, according to the Office of the Pardon Attorney at the Justice Department.
It was putting a political agenda of the Clintons above my father's life.
And what they did was set bombs, and in some instances, people died.
Sandy Berger appeared on television a day or 2 after the pardons were granted, or after the clemency was granted, and stated that these people were not personally involved in violence. That's simply not the fact. In this case, these people were convicted of planting 36 bombs in Chicago. If that's nonviolence, then Mr. Berger's dictionary is a little bit different than mine is. The Department of Justice received a memo from the FBI saying that under no circumstances should these people be released. The President of the United States, who had access to all this information, ignored the facts of the matter.
And what they did was set bombs, and in some instances, people died.
You have to ask yourself, Who benefited from this besides the terrorists themselves? It's my view that have concluded the only other person that could have benefited from this was Hillary Clinton.
The Senate, on a 95-2 vote, later denounced President Clinton's FALN clemency. Candidate Clinton claims she is the most experienced. Her husband claimed she was intimately involved in his administration, and yet Hillary said publicly she had, quote, no involvement in or prior knowledge of the decision.
Obviously she knew about it. Obviously she asked Bill to do the pardons. And obviously when she says she knows nothing about it, she's not telling the truth.
By Senator Clinton's own vetting standards, I don't think she would make it, since President Clinton pardoned or commuted the sentences of 2 members of the Weather Underground, which I think is a slightly more significant act than me serving on a board with somebody for actions that he did 40 years ago.